Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. Brought to you by Opticare. In each episode, we bring together leading eye care, optical and business professionals to share valuable insights, practical tips, and the latest trends shaping the optical business landscape. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore innovative strategies for practice growth, patient care, and business success in the eye care industry. Whether you're starting your career, managing a practice, or just looking to stay ahead of the field, The Focused View is your source for inspiration and knowledge. Welcome back to The Focused View as we continue our Elevate Your Practice series. Today we delve into the first part of our two-part series on building effective teams. I believe this to be one of the most important and least understood aspects of running an optometry business. Staff are not just part of your practice, they are your practice. Their skills and involvement shape a lot of the patient's experience and ultimately determine the success of any business. Today we're focusing on knowledge and personalities. Understanding the knowledge gaps and managing diverse personalities within your team are essential for creating a cohesive and high-performing environment. Joanne Scott Dostine, Opticare's commercial manager, joins us again to share her experience on enhancing team knowledge and fostering a thriving team culture. I'm eager to dive into the conversation today, so let's jump in. Welcome to the episode today, Jo.
Thank you for having me again.
No problems. And today we're continuing on with the series that we've been spending a couple of weeks on, and we'll continue to, the Elevate Your Practice series. Today we're going to be talking about the team and the importance of the team with regards to any optical practice or optical store. You know, I guess it goes without saying, you know, you're only as good as the team that you have. And I think it is a really, really, really critical factor for any business, whether it's an optical practice or any other. Mm-hmm. So spending some time talking about it, understanding what makes a good team and how we can, you know, learn more about this particular aspect of our business and try and improve it, I think is super powerful. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, what aspects do you think, or how should one think about the team? Because it's a pretty broad concept when it comes to an optical practice.
Yeah, it's pretty broad actually. I think one of the things I remember reading a few years ago, I think it was Richard Branson that I saw say it, but it's probably been said by a lot of people. If you look after your team, they'll look after your customers. And in our case, it's the patients, right? Because if they're happy, if they've got good education and, you know, really good culture in the business, your patients are going to be really happy as well. So it's a big part. And when I was coaching, it was probably one of the big areas that I had lots of questions about, a big area that I always was helping with, whether it was from, you know, recruitment to training, you know, to retention, in-store issues that often can happen with teams, or even sadly the part of, you know, sometimes having to let somebody go. There was a lot of time spent on it. So I did get asked a lot of questions. So it's a big part of the business, definitely.
And in terms of how you would think about it, are there certain areas that you would categorize the way that you think about a team? Or because again, it's a really broad topic, and you just touched on there, you know, sort of maybe a recruitment element and finding the right people and things like that. But with regards to the other aspects, are there ways that you think about things?
If we're going to go through the areas we probably will talk about, they're probably key areas absolutely. For us. So I think knowledge is really important. I think there's a lot of research that's been done saying that people actually spend more money if the team is educated and they get the information that they need. So it's really important. And obviously the products that we sell, it's very important. And, you know, from an education point of view, that they have good knowledge. The personalities, if you've got people that don't get along, you can feel it. One of the things I think I find quite a lot, having worked with lots of teams, is I tend to be able to feel the vibe and the culture of a team when I walk into a practice. So if they've got a really, you know, a team that works really well together and the personalities are picked right, the patients feel that as well. So people want to stay longer. So that's really important. Onboarding is key. I mean, you know, there's lots of information out there. I mean, I tend to read a lot from Gallup. I think Gallup's a great place to go to have a look. I mean, I've done my strengths on there. So they do a lot of stuff around onboarding, and they talk about the 7 steps of the life cycle of an employee. And onboarding is what sets you up. It's the starting point for everyone. So I think that's really important. And then retention. I mean, optics is a cruel business where people get, taken all the time. They're jumping in and out, they're moving around, they're changing jobs. So if you can retain people, goes a long way to helping a business, and that's a tough thing. So there's lots of things you need to consider in retention.
Yeah, I think those, I guess, sub items that you've sort of grouped those aspects into is pretty critical. And if it's okay, I might expand on each of those too, because I feel like between those that you mentioned, which are knowledge, personalities, onboarding, and retention, I think within that there's a whole heap of, I guess, of insights and knowledge there that you might have in that regard that we can expand on. So when it comes to knowledge in particular, if we start there, what strategies can practices use to assess knowledge gaps within the team, and how can they effectively address these gaps?
That's tough.
Yeah.
Because we're not all set up and trained to do that sort of thing. So look, I think the easiest thing is to really consider, who your practice is and who you're aimed at, what your patients are, what you need in that practice. So, and then looking at what people have in regards to that. So if if you're a pediatric practice, for instance, you want to make sure that, the team are trained up on understanding the differences with testing for kids, for instance, and the differences with what is needed for frames for kids. So I think you really need to consider who your practice is and what you're there for is a big thing. But with each team member, it's important to have, review processes. So, I mean, you've got to set them up for an understanding of what their expectations are, what their role is. But if you have a review process, and it doesn't have to be really formal the way that people see it, but it can be as simple as, taking each person out to coffee once a month, really chatting about how they're going, about, how they're feeling about their role, a little bit about what you're seeing when you're on the floor and when you're interacting with them. And if you tie it back to a job role or expectations that you've set, it's always a way of actually looking at their skills and understanding, are they performing to what you want them to perform to? Are they doing the things that were set up for them? And is there anything you can do to help to make that better for them? So I think that's simple ways of sort of looking at skills, but then ongoing education is really important.
Well, yeah. And that leads into the next question. Before we get there, I just wanted to touch back on a few things there. You said, and it's super critical with regards to what the store does, on how the store operates, and understanding that, because there is no one way that this is going to be addressed, and the industry itself, whether you're an independent, whether you're part of a corporate that perhaps has more, around this. Again, let's say you're with an independent. I think you mentioned the term process, so a review process. I would probably suggest that that's one key way that any type of knowledge gap can be addressed in instilling processes. When it comes to that, what are some of you mentioned review processes? Is there anything else, I guess, in that regard, where someone that's listening now can get started with some processes with regards to knowledge and understanding, how knowledgeable their staff are and where the deficiencies may lie and what to do?
Well, I think, review processes are always thought of as something that you do to decide whether somebody gets a pay rise or whether they're doing a good job. The other component of it often is a behavioural piece, but there's also the education or the, talking about what you can do to grow them. So looking at, what their learning opportunities are, where do they want to go? I mean, what are they doing now? I mean, what else would they like to do? Talking about, the role that they play when you're having a coffee conversation or something, just to say, look, what else can we do to make sure that you have all the information that you need? So asking them is really important as well. But also on the floor stuff. If you're, on the floor and you're watching and you're engaged and you're trying to take part in what's happening in the practice, you'll hear the little things that they say. You'll hear the little gaps that might be there. You'll hear the little faux pas that happen sometimes when they're talking to a patient, the things they might have said that you think, oh, maybe I need to train them on that, or maybe they could have said it a different way. So I think doing a little bit of a learning plan or asking them what they want to achieve, but also just watching on the floor is probably other ways to do it rather than a full formal process.
Yeah.
Because review processes are used for lots of things, but you can pull out just that education piece if you want to. But, little things like getting the reps in.
Yep.
I would say use your suppliers as much as you can. I mean, they come and they sell things to you, you buy things from them, but they also have great training programs usually. They usually have their team trained up that they can come in and help you, not just on their products, but they understand what's needed when you're talking to a patient. So they can give you tips on the ways to talk to people, but also how to take the information in and what's relevant that would actually be good to talk to a patient about. So talk to them about it as well.
Yeah, I think they're great points there. I think bringing it back to some type of process, but then using your suppliers and reaching out to them and asking, because I'm sure they all would love to assist. And sometimes we assume that they just may do it automatically, but maybe they do, maybe they don't. But if it's something that you feel like you need or the team needs, reaching out and being proactive in seeking that assistance, I think is probably the most effective way, both from a cost point of view, as well as the ability to implement knowledge that's probably practical for your particular store, as opposed to doing some type of course that may not be necessarily as related, maybe applicable, but not as related to your store.
Yeah, but you can plan that. I mean, if you've got, let's just say it's, your lens rep, right? Yep. Generally, they come in for different reasons, but they're going to come in and talk to you about new products. They're going to come in and talk to you about your mix. They're going to talk to you about your opportunities, but also ask them about training. So you could actually say to them in the year that, if they're going to come every 6 to 12 weeks, maybe, every alternate time there's a bit of training involved. And it's not just sometimes they only see the optometrist, or they only see the practice manager. But maybe between you need to put some time aside that they actually can come and speak to the team, because the team are on the floor all the time as well, so they need to know that information. And one of the things that happens in a practice is you're very time poor.
Yeah.
So while you might get the information from a rep, finding the time to actually, pass that on to your team is really hard. So if you can use that to your advantage and get a supplier to do that, you can plan it out a little bit as well. If there's a new lens coming up, also say to them when they ring up, well, hey, what about the team? I want to train the team, and plan that so that you're actively involved as well.
Yeah, no, they're great points. And we touched on it earlier really briefly, or you touched on it, the continuing education. Obviously, we're in an industry that always evolves, and like any industry, there are things changing. Obviously, for optometrists in particular, there is, I guess, compulsory continuing education, but when it comes to continuing education for the practice in general, what are some ways that a practice can encourage this type of learning to happen amongst their staff, which may not necessarily be something that is a compulsory or a prerequisite, but it's something that's obviously super important?
Yeah. We can give them time. I mean, a lot of the time we want people to learn, but we don't give them time to learn. So whether it is, the rep coming in, or whether you might hear about a course that's available, or just time to read up about a new brand, allowing them time off the floor is really good. If you've got team members that are maybe doing dispensing course, maybe it's good to give them a couple of hours a week where they actually come in late, leave early, so they can actually do a little bit of that work. So working with them and giving them time, I think, is a really good thing to do as well.
Yeah. And I guess I'll touch on something that's related to this when it comes to continuing education. As I mentioned, with optometrists, there is that program that they've got to adhere to get the certain amount of points per year, so they can obviously maintain their membership. With dispensers, obviously, industry was deregulated some time ago now. There is no ongoing requirement, as we mentioned, but it's also important to point out that there are associations,
absolutely,
ODA in particular at the moment. There'll be links to that in the show notes if you want to reach out to them or see what they have.
And they do continuing education for dispensers as well.
Exactly.
And it's not always just about the technical stuff. It's often about business stuff, and it's about, looking at your practice in a different way. So they do all aspects of that. So whether you're employed dispenser or you're a practice owner, they have lots of information that help you there as well.
Exactly. And that's really relatable. So that's a bit of a plug to ODA, but they're doing great things in that regard. And I think that people can reach out to them when it comes to some ongoing continuing education. That's not compulsory, but can be done and will make the practice more knowledgeable, I guess, overall.
And I think the other thing is thinking about the role of the people in your practice, because not everyone is an optom or a dispenser. So you don't need everyone to have the same sorts of education. So really plan it around what the needs are.
Yeah.
And if we go back to the first point of, understanding what your practice is doing, it's not just about, where you sit, whether you're pediatric or whether you do dry eye or whether you, whatever you're doing. Sometimes it's just about the prescribing habits. So generally these days, optoms are one of two ways. They're either, the words I use as a prescribing optometrist is somebody that actually is very prescriptive at the end and actually says to the dispenser or the team member, I want them to have this lens, and they'll talk about the lens, the brand, the coating and everything. And then there's other optoms that will just say, talk to them about progressives. So in those two different scenarios, the dispenser or the person talking to that patient requires different sorts of information as well.
Yeah.
and education. So really what I'm pulling it back to is it's, you've got the roles that they play, but also how you prescribe in the practice to how much knowledge they need to know. Because if you're somebody that just says talk about progressives, then the dispenser needs to have a broad view of, the brand that you use. And sometimes, most practices use one main lab and maybe 2 secondary labs that they'll use. They need to understand that. So the ongoing education for that is big. But also it's the troubleshooting, it's the understanding of, what the expectations are of the optometrist. So you need to have good communication and conversations around that. And even just regular talking about that within the practice of understanding, with patients, even talking about, if we've had a few coming back, why are they coming back? What else can we do about the education around that? How can we make that all better for the patient experience? So there's lots of things to think about.
Yeah. And with this particular question, we might have already answered it, but I'll go through it in any case. We obviously when we speak with suppliers and that like, we're obviously focusing there on the technical knowledge. Technical obviously is something that we've got to be adept with. It's the way that we show our clients and our customers that we're knowledgeable and we know what we're talking about with regards to the product. But there's a huge part of our industry that is focused on customer service as well as, I guess, the medical component of the lenses and the script. So how do you recommend a practice should balance the technical with the customer service skills to create a well-rounded team?
2 parts to this. So the first one, my favorite word, demographics. So understanding what your practice is and who your customer is. So looking at things like, are you a high fashion practice? What is the demographics there? So whether you need to talk about, the frames themselves, is it about face shapes? Is it about, skin tones? Understanding the words to say when you're talking about fashion in regards to just functionality. The other part of it is having a good customer journey. Because if you have a good customer journey, generally is about 8 steps in a customer journey, and each part of that involves, really good customer service. So if you sit down with your team and you work through that, you also then can work out the education pieces that come with that. So I think customer journey is the other part as well.
All right. And I guess if we jump to a different side of the team, and I think knowledge obviously is a huge component. If we focus more then on the personalities of the team and the individuals that make up the team, how can a practice or practice owners or store managers or anyone of influence within the practice identify and harness the unique strengths of their team members' personalities to foster a more positive work environment?
So I think that really starts at recruitment, which I know we'll talk a little bit about onboarding, but I think at recruitment time is the first thing is actually looking at who you have already. So if you've already got a team and you've got a couple of people and you're pulling somebody else in, it's, how do they fit in there? So you might think about the person. You might have somebody that's, really sales focused, and usually sales focused people are, the more people. They tend to talk a lot, a bit like us. They like to talk, but they tend to be a little bit messier in general, and they tend to be the people that will stand at the front and welcome the people and talk to them. Then you've got task orientated. A lot of dispensers are quite task orientated, I think, historically, where might stand behind the desk and do a little bit more of the task thing. But then you've got, louder people, quieter people. So if you look at who you have now and then think about that next person that's coming in, what sort of personality do you think would actually, complement the others? Because if you have 2 really strong people, they can work if they're a little bit different. But if they're quite strong and headstrong, you can have people butting heads all the time, and that can be stressful for the whole team. So I think at the first part, I would say consider when you bring somebody on what sort of personality you need. But fostering them together is really, as you said, it's about understanding their strengths. So if you can work with them to understand, where their strengths are, assign tasks that suit, because that makes them happier. If people are working in their place of strength, they're actually a happier people and they have more output. Generally, people are not working in a place of strength. That's when they actually struggle to get their thought process and to make things happen. So it actually makes them not work so well. And that's when you'll have a little bit of, the issues that you have within teams. So I think it's about aligning them, but then doing a lot of things together and then letting them understand their roles within that team. Because as people learn about each other, understand each other's strengths, understand how each other works, there's a place for everyone, and they naturally fall into that if you actually, foster that within the team.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are practices that have been around for a while and that probably have situations or staff members that are, just ingrained into the furniture, and we're probably, maybe there are areas of improvement or areas that are recognisable to address, but because we don't want to I guess, stir the pot, for lack of a better term. We might put up with things. In those situations when you've identified a little bit of a flaw there as a manager or as the owner of a store, what ways can you address that without necessarily, I guess, causing or creating a bigger issue?
Yeah, this is probably the area that I probably have done a lot of work with people on, because this is a thing that people really struggle with. I think you've got to think of it in a couple of ways. I mean, if they're the only person in the team, it's always been that way. It's really not going to make that much difference to the practice. Things get done and you get along okay, then, and things are working. Probably not worth rocking the boat too much. The thing where you have to start to consider is it impacting patients? Because that's a big driver of your business. But if there's other team members, you don't want to lose good team members because you've got somebody who's really strong and says, well, this is the way we've always done it, or, why would we change, because this works, or this is the way I like it done, when you try to put something in place. When that happens, look, the best way you can do it is to start to think about culture, start to think about what the shared values are, start to actually talk about that. And if you pull the team in and say, look, we want to move to the next level, we've been doing things great, things are working really well, but we think there's some improvements that we can do and there's opportunities for us. What we want to do is first of all sit down and look at, what are the values of, us as a team? What are the non-negotiables? If we want to move to here, as a team, how can we do that? It's about bringing them along for the journey. They need to understand your why. They need to be communicated to along the whole process. And if you start to talk to them about that and you have a really open conversation, it's really interesting how people tend to turn around and start to say, oh, I can see that, or yeah, actually I'd like that to happen, but I don't know where to start, or yeah, I actually feel that I'm probably a problem there because I know that I do this.
Yeah.
It's all about that, that shared stuff, shared values, shared ideals, good communication, and being very open and honest, I think is the starting point for it. But once you do it, you've got to set your expectations and the boundaries, and you've got to make sure there's repercussions. If you don't have repercussions and you let them get away with it all the time and there's problems, they don't know any better.
Yeah.
If you address a team, I mean, I regularly see people will say to a team, hey, we're having issues with this. We need everyone to do this. The people who are doing it wrong will think, well, it's not me because they haven't talked to me. The people that are doing it right think, well, what have I done wrong because we're talking about this? So you actually get the wrong message across anyway.
Right.
You need to address the people, and it needs to be timely, and you need to make sure that you're actually always going back on the expectations that you set. I think that's one way of starting to look at it.
Yeah, no, and it's obviously never an easy situation. It's not a pleasant one, but I guess it's important to be mindful of it and then have some mindset as to what to do, how to do it. And I guess that's the whole point of the conversation today.
Planning is always the key with anything.
You
need to, and when you're going to go and talk to somebody, when there is, if it's a particular issue, there's a problem and you want to talk to them, you need to make sure that you have facts. You've got to take emotion out of it.
Yeah.
You've got to have the facts, because they're the people that are going to say to you, well, when did that happen? If you say, I've noticed this is happening, they're going to say when. So you need to say, it was Mrs. Jones on the 10th of April at 3 p.m. and this is what you said.
Yeah.
So that you can actually give them the information. And you also got to come at it from a point of, it's not about finger pointing. It's not about just sitting here and wrapping my fingers and saying you're doing the wrong thing. It's about how we grow. It's about doing things better for the patients. It's about, making change. So we want, a solution. We're not about just having a go. We're about having a solution. So,
And invariably, if we are, looking at the majority of, say, independents, they're generally small teams. Yeah. It's quite personal. Everyone knows each other. There's generally a lot of family connection. Yeah. There's a lot of intricacies with regards to that. There's, it could be a friend as well as a worker. And so you've obviously generally got blurred lines. And so they're all things to be mindful of. And in those instances, how best, I don't know, would you advise that is managed?
Rules of engagement is what I would say.
Yeah.
So there's lots of husbands and wives that work together.
Yeah.
And, what I would say to them, when I've worked with them in the past is there should be a street on your way home that once you get to that street, you stop talking about work.
Exactly.
Once you get past that, you start talking about home, and vice versa in the morning.
Yeah.
But also there needs to be respect to say that while I'm at work, if I'm the owner and I'm the main person who's here most of the time and I'm making most of the decisions, then I will treat you like one of the other workers, and that you can't bring that personal stuff into it. But then the person who's making the decisions needs to make sure they talk in a way that's not, more familiar or condescending because that person's in a relationship with them, because that will fuel an issue. So they've got to talk to them the same way they talk to everyone else. And the same rules have to apply. So,
And I guess it's more an instance in the independently run practices that have that freedom. With most corporates or, with chains and things, they've generally got their processes pretty well
Lots
in
of
bed.
processes.
So they rely on that a lot, I guess, as well.
And I think the other thing that often happens, and I think why you have a few issues within teams, is that, look, in more practices that we have, they're owned by Optoms than they are by dispensers.
Yeah.
The Optom's in the room. They don't see what's going on. So they only hear the bickering. They only hear the people complaining. So they need to come up with a way of, either making somebody else responsible for the people side, or finding time where they can actually work on the business, not just in it, to maybe be there and see what's happening, so they can really have good conversations about the team and make sure that they're working on the areas that need to be worked on, rather than just a reaction to the person who has the biggest voice.
Yeah. A lot of the things that we've been speaking about are all geared towards something I know you're super passionate about, which is culture. And I guess all these things that we're talking about with regards to the team invariably a direct result of culture. And I believe, in my experience with culture, is it's obviously something that is not necessarily proactively looked at. It is something that essentially gets fostered as a business grows, and it just happens to be what it happens to be, especially with smaller independent style of businesses. So when it comes to culture in particular, and acknowledging the personalities of the staff, how do you approach building a team culture that embraces, diversity in personalities, but also enables us to maintain unity in the goals that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think I think in the first episode we talked a little bit about this, right? So the culture is really the way we do things around here. It really gives people a set of rules of, if I'm not here and I'm the leader, what do I do? And they know what they need to do. Fostering it is, it comes back to the leader. There's a lot of research out there. You see lots of stats, and there's always those memes that say people don't leave businesses, they leave leaders, and bad leadership is what causes people to leave, that sort of stuff. It's true. I mean, we're going to talk about onboarding soon. One of the key things that they say is that if the manager's not involved, or the leader of that area of that business or that person, if they're not really involved and not engaged, that sets you up for failure anyway. So I think that the leadership is really important in culture. It's that thing of lead by example, right? I think I used to work in a business where they worked on the fish philosophy, and it's always the fish stinks from the head, which is like the leadership, right? Yeah. So it starts with the way that the leaders portray themselves and the way that they, set expectations and the way they follow through. And a lot of people don't even know that they're setting up culture. Like there's practices you'll go into and they're all happy and beautiful and wonderful, and everyone floats around and they help each other, and you can just see it's really nice. And it's led by somebody that doesn't even know that that's what they're portraying and that's what they're building. But I think it's all about that thing of the teamwork. It's getting people to work together. It's letting people understand, where their place is, what their role is, and then setting the rules of engagement, I think, is the key to setting yourself up for culture.
And if someone can, because we're sort of making this a really sort of important point with regards to culture. If someone's interested in understanding more about the culture, are there things that they can do from a I guess a review point of view themselves, or from a management point of view, where they can start to identify what kind of culture is currently existing?
Yeah, and it is really hard. I mean, I know, again, I'm sorry, I sound like I'm harping on this, but if I go back to my coaching days, one of the things that I would do is if it's somebody that was new, or I would try to review each of the people I spoke to or work with once a year. Somebody from the outside, somebody that they trust, coming in and asking questions is going to get a lot more out of the team than the people they work for.
Absolutely.
Because if there's an issue in there, they're not going to tell you that there's an issue. So if you can get somebody to come in and talk to them, I mean, taking each person aside for 15 minutes and just asking a few key questions, which is what I would do, I could then go to the owners and say, hey, I'm not going to tell you who said what, but I'm going to say to you the common thread is you have issues because of these reasons, and this is what you need to work on.
Yeah.
But they've got to have an open mind to work on that as well, because a lot of the time they don't know what they're doing either. So I think if you can if you have the ability to do that and you can have somebody come in, that's great. If you have somebody who's one of the leaders in your team that's really good with people and everyone respects them, that would be the person, I think. And the other thing is, I spoke a little bit before about having those little coffee dates where you take them off-site. Talking to them about things like, how do you think you're going? What can I do to support you better? What do you think of the things we could do better? And where can we, help to grow you? And is there any things that I've not, addressed or anything that's happening that we need to look at? If you do that and you continue to do that and they see that you're not going back and running to somebody to say, this person said that, they see that there's things happening because of that and there's changes happening, they'll open up more and more.
Yeah. It's definitely a topic that I know I could talk about all day, but there's so much to it, and I think it is such an important part. But I think from what we've touched on to this point, I think there's enough there for people to start to think about it if they haven't, and if they are, maybe ways on how to foster that type of environment that they're really after. Thank you for joining us on The Focused View, proudly presented by Opticare. It's been our privilege to share the insights and stories that resonate deeply with the eye care community. We hope today's episode has not only inspired you, but also armed you with the practical strategies and innovative ideas to help you enhance your practice and professional journey. If you found value in our conversation, we'd be grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. And share this episode with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals like you and grow our community of visionaries. Stay connected by subscribing to The Focused View and visiting our website www.thefocusedview.com.au for additional resources and episode summaries. We look forward to your company again in our next episode. Until then, keep focused. I'm Michael Nasser. Bye for now.